Welcome to the Fighting on Film podcast, the podcast all about classic and obscure war movies, from the Normandy landings to the days of chivalry and swords. If it's been captured on film, we're going to try and cover it. I'm Robbie of RM Military History.
I'm Matthew Moss of Historical Firearms and the Armourer's Bench.
Welcome back once again to Fighting on Film, everybody. Today we bring you another stellar guest, one of the UK's leading historians, one half of the We Have Ways podcast. We welcome James Holland onto the show.
Welcome, James.
Hello, James. Yes.
Hello. Thanks for having me on. And I've got a confession to make. I know we've been trying to fix this up for several weeks and, well, several months, actually. And I keep having to change the date. So I'm very, very relieved to finally be here. And I'm sorry for mucking you boys around.
Not at all.
Oh, it's no problem. We're thrilled to have you on. And we are going to be talking about the 1945 Errol Flynn epic, Objective Burma.
Yes, we are.
I'm super excited about this.
Gosh, what a movie. What a movie. And the first thing I'd like to say about it is just how well it stands up. I mean, It is amazing how often war films that were made during the war are really awful. I mean, they're wooden, they're clunky, they just look so dated, the kit's wrong, the airplanes are wrong, the kind of the sort of faux kind of CGI looks awful. Yeah, looks like exactly what it is, kind of sort of model on a screen. But none of that with Objective Burma. It looks absolutely for real. And
it really holds up.
I mean, I don't know whether you noticed just how well do they weather their uniforms.
Yeah,
I mean, by the end of it, they're really grimy. They're sweating, aren't they? You feel hot.
The way it deteriorates over time is real attention to detail.
All the kit is correct. All the weapons are correct. Uniforms are correct at the time. I mean, actually, probably not, actually, are they? Because they're using parachute. They're using US. Okay, so we should. Well, I'm jumping ahead here.
It's no problem. It's no problem. Early alley tally, perhaps. So we'll go through the cast a little bit. So obviously, the main man himself, the top billing, is Errol Flynn, and we know that James is one of your heroes.
Yeah, he is. He is. Ever since I watched Dawn Patrol on a Friday afternoon, it was Channel 4, 2:00 Friday afternoon, while I was in my last year at university, and I was up at Durham. I remember watching it, just thinking, this guy is absolutely fantastic. And Dawn Patrol, for those who don't know it, is set in 1917 or something, and it's RFC, Royal Flying Corps, and it's a sort of anti-war film, but it's about the kind of sort of casual brutality of the First World War and how awful it was. Made in 1939, I think. Huge hit at the time. Also stars Basil Rathbone and David Niven. And it's got this just immortal opening sequence where, you have the kind of dramatic music, and then you are straight into a dogfight. And literally the first scene you see is a kind of sort of head-on shot of Errol Flynn, goggles, flying helmet, sort of oil and smut all over his face, firing his machine guns at some Hun. The planes sort of pirouette and swirl around the sky, and then eventually they touch back down and land in a surprisingly hilly place, which clearly is California, not northern France. And David Niven jumps out. He goes, "What ho, Courtney? Pretty hot up there." And Errol Flynn looks at him and goes, "What ho, Scotto? Pretty warm." And it's just so fantastic. And from there on, I was absolutely hooked, and I've loved Errol Flynn ever since. And if for those of you who haven't read his autobiography, My Wicked, Wicked Ways, I strongly recommend you do. It is the best autobiography by a movie star ever, bar none.
Is that the one he was writing during filming? Because he was apparently writing a bit of an autobiography while he was filming Objective Burma.
No, I think he was writing B Men's, which was his novel at the time.
Okay, so the source on that's a bit mistaken.
He was very conflicted, because when he was a young, he was obviously incredibly good-looking bloke. He was very kind of, he was a man's man, and he had this incredible life, sort of growing up with a son of a kind of university professor, living in Tasmania, and then he had itchy feet and kind of went a roving, and sort of started traveling the world, and he ended up running a coconut plantation in somewhere like sort of Sarawak or somewhere like that, and bedded the plantation owner's wife and got sacked, and that was that. And had various adventures on ships. It did a bit of sort of slave trading as well at one point. Then ended up running a cockfighting racket in Hong Kong. And eventually, kind of after sort of loads of ventures and misadventures, eventually wound his way to England, where he was sort of spotted as a good-looking young chap and kind of got into acting and ended up being one of the kind of main staples of the Northamptonshire Rep in Northampton, most unlikely places. And from there got spotted and sent over to Hollywood. And when he was in Hollywood, he was an absolute hellraiser, kind of lived shared a house with David Niven, kind of hung out, kind of bedded lots of girls, kind of just was a general bad boy, hugely charming. And obviously made his name with Captain Blood and Charge of the Light Brigade, and most famously, I suppose, Robin Hood, which was Technicolor, 1938, 1939, something like that, was a huge global hit. I mean, just on off the radar, made him an absolute megastar. And he just always felt that it was a bit kind of worthless, that this is not what real men do, wandering around in tights and stuff. There's a great scene in that where he's doing a sort of sword fight with Basil Rathbone, who is the Sheriff of Nottingham. And you see the shadow going up the staircase and all the rest of it. Mm-hmm. And Errol Flynn goes, "It's injustice I hate, not Normans." And it's a brilliant line. And there's lots of kind of hands on hips and putting your head back and laughing. Whoa, Little John.
Yeah, a lot of that.
Yeah.
And it's just fantastic. And he was kind of got increasingly tortured and increasingly took to the bottle. And then in 1942 or 43, he got accused of statutory rape, by sort of having sex with someone underage, and got put on trial. And although he was acquitted, it absolutely threw him. It's a reputation he never got. And that's where In Like Flynn comes from and all the rest of it. And for someone like, the whole point is that, he was a total Julio and he just found the whole thing just excruciating and deeply humiliating, deeply embarrassing. And he took to the bottle ever more, became a raging alcoholic, and died in 1959, aged just 50. And when he died, he looked 70. I mean, this sort of magnificent kind of embodiment of kind of good look, swashbuckling He-Man with the square jaw and all the rest of him, perfect teeth. I mean, it's just, he was a wreck of a man. And it's a great tragedy. But My Wicked, Wicked Ways is very funny, very self-deprecating, very honest, I think.
He says about his later career, he says, like, I make more money being a shadow of my former self than I did at the time. I think it's all this, like, the self-deprecating sort of humor. I really appreciate it, but it's really refreshing to see him in almost like a straight role. He's not swashbuckling in Objective Burma, and I think it shows him in a completely different light.
Yes, and it's quite an understated role. I mean, he did have this sort of penchant in his films, particularly in his adventure films and his comedies, for sort of, doing the nudge, nudge, wink, wink, and kind of, hamming it up a little bit. But he doesn't at all. He plays it really, really straight. It's definitely one of his better roles, I think. It's right up there with Dawn Patrol in terms of, I mean, he's absolutely brilliant in Dawn Patrol.
I think it gives him a lot more to do than some of his other films, to be honest.
Yeah, and it is quite gritty.
There's some challenges in there for him. The scene where he finds Jacobs.
Yes.
And he just stretches his legs a little bit more, I think.
Definitely.
Yeah, the scene with Jacobs is really good, and so, I mean, we should talk about the plot, shouldn't we, a little bit?
Yeah, definitely.
Are we still on the stars? I don't really know any of the
no
stars
problem.
are, to be honest.
Appearing with Flynn, we have Henry Hull, who is a really famous little character actor, really, really good. He was in Lifeboat, the Alfred Hitchcock thing, and he plays Mark Williams, who is the sort of Ernie Pyle / Ernest Hemingway-esque war correspondent. We also have George Tobias as Corporal Gabby Gordon. He's a sort of fast-talking, funny man. He gets all the funny quips. And you've got William
Prince
as Lieutenant Jacobs. He was in Network, and it has a good cast. And it's just got a load of uncredited roles as well. I think one of the military advisors, Major M.H. Wythe, who is in the Indian Army Burma Rifles, has a tiny little cameo at the start where he's...
Oh, yes, where he's doing the briefing.
Yeah, he's down as Major Fitzpatrick, I think.
That's it. He has a sentence of information, and then that sort of he just walks off.
I think the actual production team are almost as interesting as the cast, because you've got people like James Wong Howe, Chinese American cinematographer, Oscar winning nominated absolute top of his game. And then the story is credited to Alva Bessie, who is a Columbia graduate who went to Spain and fought with the Abraham Lincoln Brigade.
Amazing.
Yes, indeed.
Later one of the Hollywood 10 and got blacklisted. And he was nominated for an Oscar for this picture.
Wow.
Yeah. Well, the script is really good, isn't it?
Which is incredible.
And interestingly enough, the screenplay is written by Ranald McDougall, who wrote Cleopatra, but listeners to the show will know him for writing the screenplay for Dark of the Sun when we covered it in the Mercenary Month. So that's a nice little link there. Yeah, very different. So the film is released in the US on the 26th of January, has a premiere in New York. And over here, 1945, yeah. And over here, it's released in September 21st or 22nd, 1945. Comes out over here, and it just has its controversy from day one. So I have a retro review that I dug up from the archives. So I'll read a little bit out for us now. And it's from the Daily Herald, and it's written by P.L. Manick on the 22nd of September, 1945. And he says, a disarming forward for the British consumption amidst this United States paratrooper exploit might have been British one, but the film has two regrettable repercussions. First, that American audiences will probably be persuaded that Burma was liberated by Americans only. And second, that the picture has already been very tactlessly shown to our own men on the spot. United States officers, in fact, have already protested against this monstrous lack of credit to our own troops. It has embarrassed them. They call it sickening and enraging. Otherwise, it is an exciting adventure of a paratrooper unit destroying a Jap radar station in the jungles of Burma.
Well, yes. I mean, I think it's the final scene where there's a sort of airborne invasion by Americans. That really rankles. But I don't really see there's that much wrong with the rest of it. I mean, obviously there weren't airborne troops there. So that we should just eventually talk about the plot. So the idea is that there's a US airborne unit in Burma, and they want to do there's going to be an Allied invasion, but that is not apparent at the time of the briefing of this mission. They want to do a long range penetration to take out a radar station and then come out again. And they go in, so it's kind of a couple of dozen people, and maybe there's two flights of Dakotas, isn't it?
Yeah.
So it's like 30 men, like a platoon.
Yeah, 30, I'd say.
Under Captain Nelson, who is Errol Flynn. And they take off in their two Dakotas, they get dropped, that's all fine. They find the radar station, they take it out, completely destroy it, that's all fine. Then they get compromised. And the pickup place where they're supposed to be picked up by these Dakotas has been overrun by Japanese, and so that's not possible. So they then need to go to another rendezvous, but they split up in the process of making that rendezvous. And at the rendezvous, near the rendezvous, they're discovered by Japanese. They have a big ding dong, and they can't be picked up. Then they arrange for another pickup point or place where they might be dropped, but then they break their radio. And so what are they going to do? And it's their struggles to sort of get away from it, get back out again. That's the issue. And eventually they do. There's an Allied invasion, which seems to be entirely made up of American paratroopers. And I guess it's that bit that's really, really the problem, because of course, there were plenty of American troops in China, Burma, India. Mm-hmm. Stilwell had his base in southwest China. Was training Chinese divisions under his command, but also had people like Merrill's Marauders, who were kind of went in early 1944, and they were doing pretty much the same as the Chindits. There was kind of sort of 3,000 of them. They're all volunteers. They were sent over. They were under direction of MacArthur. There was a combination of people that had been from the United States, but also people that had served in Guadalcanal and the South Pacific. And they went in, they did a series of very, very successful operations, in 1944 and early part of 1945, right through to and they famously took out this airfield at Maitakina in May 1945. And, this is sort of what this film is based on, isn't it? I think.
Yeah, I think
these sort of guys. I mean, it's the idea. I mean, I guess the other thing is the reason they're Americans is because it's made in Hollywood and it's Warner Brothers and it's made in California.
There's a War Department memo that I found that was sent to the studio while they were making the film. The Burmese activities have involved the 23rd and 38th Chinese Divisions and the 36th Indian Division, a special outfit of 3,000 American infantrymen, the Cochrane American Air Commandos carried in a battalion of American Airborne Combat Engineers, plus British Indian ground troops. And they finally say that, I recognise the fact that this is alleged to be a fictitious story, but it is a production, it is so authentic, so vivid and realistic that a major part of the public is going to accept it as a record of the events, especially in view of the announced cooperation of the Air Forces, the paratroopers and the War Department. Therefore, I feel we can bring its level of historical information up to the present level of an authentic background. We will be serving the war effort well. So they were telling the studio...
Wow.
They were telling the studio, this is in December 44. This is a month before it premieres. And they're telling the studio, you might get some pushback if you put it out the way you do. And it obviously in England, there's a massive press furore. The Mirror, the Telegraph, and the Times, they really lay into the movie. And I'll show it to us now. I'll share the screen. So I would like to get some reactions of one of the cartoons that appears in the Mirror.
And for listeners, we'll share this on the website as well, fightingonfilm.com. And
on the Twitter, @fightingonfilm. So this is the cartoon that the Mirror puts up on the 7th of October. 5th of October, 45.
Wow, look at that.
Yeah. So for audio listeners, it's a very stereotypical director sitting in a director's chair. It says Gigantic Productions, Inc., Hollywood. And he's holding a script for a movie called Atom Bomb. And it says all American. At the time, there'd been an atom bomb movie that pretty much whitewashed the British involvement in creating the bomb. And then in the corner there's more scripts. And there's one that says script for the All-American Burma Front. So at the time, the controversy about Objective Burma had come out. And there's a chap in a suit. And the fellow who's sitting in the chair is sitting on a graveyard, and it says Britain's sacrifice for world freedom. And the strapline is, excuse me, but you're sitting on some graves.
That's absolutely amazing. What a fantastic picture, cartoon. I mean, I think people are feeling very, very sore because of the situation in Europe, because of it was very clear after Roosevelt died, Truman takes over, the atomic bomb, suddenly there was this sort of sea change. There was this sudden, having had this amazing levels of cooperation and collaboration with the coalition of America and Britain for much of the war, suddenly after the end of the European war, it's kind of freeze-out time. And I think Britain is feeling very sore about that. We've still got bombed out streets and all that kind of stuff, and America seems to be sort of getting fat on the back of other people's misery. And I think it's entirely justified that the Americans and Hollywood and Warner Brothers take the route they take, because Americans were in Burma. At no point do they say they're the only troops in Burma.
Yeah.
But I also can see why in Britain, particularly in the autumn of 1945, where it's suddenly, okay, we're coming home and we're coming home to rationing, to kind of, we've got victory, but what's the future? We've lost, effectively losing our empire. We've lost, we're stony broke, all those kind of things. You can see why people are a bit sensitive about it at the time. It comes out in 1952. It's reissued in 1952. And it's fine then. Everyone sort of calmed down.
Yeah, the reviews that I found around that time, it still rankles, but they give it more of a fair review. That they go, we remember the controversy from 45, but there is an epilogue or a prologue where they do say, with thanks to the Commonwealth forces and Great Britain. So it was reissued with a statement beforehand. Right. But it's still issued. I mean, did you find some letters to the studio?
I did. So the furore around it began in May 45, and the Dundee Courier carries a piece that's called "Burma, a Film Attacked. Travesty says U.S. Colonel," and they speak to or they have a letter from a Lieutenant Colonel Taylor, who was the commander of the glider men under Cochrane, and it says, "It was a disturbing thought that the meretricious hodgepodge, which implies that Burma was invaded and liberated by a force of American parachutists, glider-borne troops, 2 Gurkha guides and a Chinese officer, will be seen by thousands of men of the 14th Army who know better." So there's an American colonel calling it a little bit of a travesty. And from there, it seems that it snowballs, and the film is apparently shown to men in India and Burma before it comes to cinemas in the US and England. So we get this sort of initial pushback. Once those reviews that Rob mentioned from Manic come out and others, and it sort of syndicates throughout all the press, we get a little bit of pushback from Warner, who in September, 26 September 45, Max Mahler, who was a managing director of Warner Brothers, pushes back on the criticism and says that there's no foundation to any of the criticism. Wow. And that it doesn't deliberately ignore the major part played by the British 14th Army. So Warner Brothers are obviously on the back foot and on the defensive on that. Within days, it's pulled from UK.
Yeah,
the War Office.
War Office, yeah. It's crazy.
But isn't it amazing how, just how sensitive people are? I mean,
I have another letter from a viewer who says, during the last 2 or 3 years, we've had the Americans stationed with us. Although their behavior has not always been exemplary, we've taken it with customary good humor, which I thought was very interesting. We have also seen some films sent over here by American film companies of the brilliant exploits of their troops on almost every battlefield in which they have been associated. These films have overflowed with their flowing banners and brass bands, patriotic songs, and dewy-eyed mothers saying farewell to their sons. We've taken these as being American characteristics and have become used to this type of picture about themselves. There is, however, a picture now showing in Britain called Objective Burma, which should be objectionable about Burma. So he's retitled it there quite
fantastic.
Nicely. This film demonstrates how the Doughboys carried out an operation against the Japanese. The forgotten 14th Army is now pushed into oblivion. The sufferings of our prisoners of war counted for little. The only mention made of British troops is with such raillery, one would think they were never there. It's a great pity that our gallant lads from the Far East have to come home from their privations on the battlefield to see American paratroops winning the Battle of Burma for them. So a little bit long, but that is a letter sent from a Frankie Willits of Kings Norton to the Birmingham Mail on the 25th.
Wow.
Hugely irritated by this fact.
You have this over and over and over again with films. I mean, it's the same point about Band of Brothers, and it's the same point about Saving Private Ryan. I mean, you'd be forgiven for thinking there were any Brits involved in Saving Private Ryan, but Saving Private Ryan is about one small unit and a rescue mission.
And so is this.
And so is this. And it's not. At no point in the film does it say there were no British and Indian troops here, or Gurkhas. It just says this is the story of these two. So
exactly. I think that's.
I think the criticism is. I totally get it. Why there's the sensitivities at the end of the war, but I also think it's kind of not really.
Yeah,
today it seems ridiculous that it would be that people would be so sensitive. My answer would be is make your own film then. Make a really good movie.
Yeah,
that does involve British, Indian, and Gurkha troops.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think me and Matt were talking when we were planning the episode, and we think it's a little bit of, well, have you seen the film? How many people actually went and saw it after this controversy? Because if you do watch it, there are Gurkhas involved, there are Commonwealth troops represented, and at the end, it does say with thanks to, the Commonwealth forces.
There's the inclusion of Major Fitzpatrick, the two Gurkha guides from the border force. And interesting you should mention that, James, that they should have made their own film. Another letter to the Scotsman on the 26th of September actually ends with, the film made me extremely angry. What is wrong, so very wrong, is that the film suggests the whole of the fighting was done by Americans. Just think how popular in America would a film depicting David Niven and a platoon of the Highland Light Infantry leading the British Army to capture the Philippines. So it kind of twists it on its head.
I'd watch that.
There's another similar letter that says, what if we made a film where some Royal Marines captured Okinawa or something like that? Yeah,
it's true.
But I think it is it's that final scene of the airborne invasion going over that's the thing that really rankles, isn't it? I mean, that's the thing. The actual mission itself, there's nothing wrong with it at all, really.
No, you're right.
I mean, I don't know. I just think, the film is about a small number of men doing a deep penetration mission. Americans did do that in Burma. They weren't paratroopers, but they did do it. So they were sort of special forces. I mean, Marauders by today's standards would be considered special forces.
Yeah.
And that did happen. And at no point in the film does it say there aren't any British there or any Indian troops
In
there.
fact, it goes out of its way to include them, and it does mention at the end of the film. It reads, "The film is gratefully dedicated to the men of the American, British, Chinese, and Indian armies, without whose heroic efforts Burma would still be in the hands of the Japanese."
Exactly.
So obviously that's added postscript.
Yeah.
Probably because of some of the furore. I don't know whether that was on the original.
Well, maybe we should forget the furore though and talk about the film, because the film I think I think the film is terrific. I really, really enjoyed it.
You have to mention the controversy around it because it's almost as interesting as the film itself.
Quickly wrap up production. The budget of the film is huge for the time. It's 1.59 million, which, and you can see that on screen. You know, it holds up, and I think it holds up because Warner Brothers are really pushing it. You know, because they've signed Errol Flynn to a 7-picture deal. He's obviously had his controversies at this time. This is one of the movies that he's trying to sort of lift himself out of. So you can see, you know, the money on screen, and of course Errol couldn't serve because of his medical history. He was declared unfit for service. So this is another thing that, you know, the studio helps him with, you know, do war pictures, you know, support the war in that way.
Yeah, he hated the fact that he couldn't join up.
Yeah.
You know, the war was sort of almost made for him. This was his rescue, his opportunity to go back to doing what he really wanted to do, which was being a kind of a He-Man, being macho. And so his frustration at not being allowed to take part was just immense. And it was because he had a bad back. It was because he had TB. It was because he had malaria. It's because he had a whole host of kind of sort of lurgies, all of which he'd contracted mainly, well, apart from the bad back, most of them he'd got during his years of adventuring in the late 1920s and early 30s. So it's not that he was kind of sort of ducking service by any stretch of the imagination.
Not
and he did go to the Spanish Civil War, of course. So,
yeah, he did.
As a journalist. So, you know, he went out there. So
yeah. And then obviously, you know, he was a bit notorious for not turning up on time, things like that. But apparently whenever he did a war picture, he was on an absolute, you know, his top form, would always be on set, best behavior. So
he has some quite a lot of monologues in this.
Yeah, he does. Yeah. And I think that he actually, as I said earlier, it's a completely different performance than what you're used to seeing. You know, there's a lot of emotion there. There's a lot of subtlety to his acting that I don't think you necessarily get from something like Captain Blood or Robin Hood.
No,
not a swashbuckler in this. So,
but it is a Errol Walsh film, which is notable because obviously in the 40s he had this whole run of films with Walsh. They Died with Their Boots On, Desperate Journey, Northern Pursuit. So there are all these 40s films which, you know, Walsh is at the top of his game, and he's obviously pulling something out of Flynn with this one because the script obviously stretches his legs. But I think I agree with James. I think it's probably one of his best performances. I love Flynn movies. I got to say. I mean, I as a kid, I grew up watching, you know, Seahawks, Captain Blood. Absolutely love the swashbucklers, but this one's really interesting because I don't know. He just seems to be really, you know, on his game.
Yeah, and you can tell like the characterization. He cares about his men, and he's always reminding them, you know, take your salt tablets. Let's stop and have some food. Everyone take 10. It's a sort of level of care that you don't sometimes see in war films of the era. They don't make the effort to show leaders of men being more considerate to their men on a human level. You know, I think Niven in The Way Ahead gets that a little bit. But, you know, it's just refreshing to see an American character in a movie at that time, not just being like a macho man. He's actually compassionate about his men. And when they find the remnants of the second section after they split and they've been tortured and killed by the Japanese, that sequence for me, it elevates the movie because it's gone from regular sort of war movie to saying a lot more about the war at home to people and really ramming it home. You know, I don't know how, you know, obviously people at home
call themselves civilized people.
That's it.
Great. That's what the journalist says.
Yeah, Williams's little diatribe there is great.
It's really good.
That whole sequence is really, it's quite tense there. I thought the other thing I thought was absolutely brilliantly done was the last big shootout when they're on the they're on the knoll, and the Japanese are advancing in the night.
Yeah, really tense.
And there's a guy in the foxhole, and he's really starting to sweat, and you're just waiting for something to happen, and then the flare goes off, and then he gets knifed, doesn't he? And then the flare goes off, and it's really well done.
Yeah, and that scene, almost for me, it could be out of like a Korean War movie, it could be out of a Vietnam War movie. It's timeless, like cinema, really. That whole end sequence and the way it uses lighting, and it's
beautifully shot.
Yeah, it's almost too good for 45. Like you can, because it's again, you can see the budget on screen. The scale of the film is.
You just kind of wish there was a little bit more of that end battle. But
I mean, it's interesting because they use I mean, most of it is filmed at a Santa Anita ranch in Pasadena.
Yeah,
and there's also an arboretum.
Yeah, in California
that they use for a lot of the scene. Yeah, exactly. So they use that a lot. But then they're obviously using real footage as well of people chucking out the supply drops out of the Dakotas and stuff.
Yeah,
and that's just done so seamlessly, because usually that's really clunky. And I think most people wouldn't know that. I mean,
no, I've got in my notes. It's under my one of my fave sequences in the film. I think that splicing together of the guys in the Dakota cockpit looking behind them, and they've got the guys with the supplies chucking them out, and that cuts to stock footage. If you weren't versed in Second World War stock footage and had seen the amount of documentaries that I'm sure we've all seen, and listeners will know, but if you were a complete novice, you're thinking probably that's been filmed for the movie, because it is seamless. And we all know in films, like, oh God, is it The Desert Rats or The Desert Patrol with Richard Burton, which is like 90% stock footage, and it just doesn't cut properly. The film grain is too much. I almost feel
speed.
And the speed is different. But I think in this one they've redoctored the footage. They've slowed it down so it matches, and it's just sublime.
It does. It gives it an almost documentary feel to it.
So
like that
good.
opening sequence with the P-38 and the whole sequence where it's doing like a reconnaissance mission. The camera doesn't go to anyone from the cast for the first 5 minutes of the movie, because it's purely following a chap taking some film from the P-38, taking it literally into the lab, developing it, and then we get into sort of like the mission briefing parts of the film. But it's really interesting that they spliced in all this footage, because it's all filmed by US Army Single Corps, and I don't know if you want to mention this later, Rob, when we talk about that fave scene, but I did find in the Burma India Roundup from April 45, there's a story in there where some of Merrill's Marauders and one of the Army Single Corps guys that actually filmed the footage of them pushing the food out of the Dakota.
Wow.
Sat and watched the film. And they talk about what they think about it and how accurate it is.
Oh, that's incredible. That's great.
Yeah. So there's a little bit that says it's referring to the bit where they attacked the radar station, and he says the way they wiped out those Japs just doesn't happen. There should have been a couple of stragglers. There are always some wounded in an action like that. So notably in that sequence, everyone's dead. Once they've finished their attack on that, everyone's dead. There's no Japanese wounded. No one gets away. It goes on to talk about the bird noises in the background and the wait now bird. There's a little bit where he says, I suppose they similarly gave us away to the Japs. What he's talking about when people moved, the birds sort of started calling. Yeah. And he says, I said to myself, hell, I can remember that. It's Burma, all right. Which I thought was a great little thing to include.
Yeah.
To have that contemporary sort of view of a soldier who's fought is like, when do you ever get that? We've never had
that. And just one tiny last little bit that I thought was really striking. The article concludes with, every time a Jap was killed in the picture, the ex-marauders would laugh. And one said, I don't suppose it was really funny to anyone, but just seeing those guys go down makes you feel good.
Wow.
Wish it was that easy to knock them off in real life as it is in movies. So,
jeez.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah.
Apparently they like the movie. They actually really like the movie, but they are Americans. So you can't really take that for...
Yeah. I mean, I had an uncle who fought in Burma with one of the commando units out there. he didn't like Japan. He's very anti-Japanese. Whenever we took him out to buy something like an electrical appliance, he wouldn't. It had to be. It could be Korean. It could be Vietnamese. It could be Taiwan. You know, if it's is it built? He would go, is it built in Japan? And my dad would have to go, no, it's not built in Japan. Don't worry. He goes, good, because I won't have it in my house. It really affected him. So I can see how that guy might have been feeling at the time, you know, and coming off it so fresh. It's amazing. So James, a section of the movie you really liked?
Well, I suppose my favourite was the bit with when they're in the village, and you know, they get attacked by the Japanese. First of all, they discover that the other part of the column that's been split in two has been tortured and left for dead. They've got to take out the two Japanese troops that have been left to kind of sort of guard the village, and then they get counterattacked, and they've got to escape down through the water, through the river, and it's just a really, really fantastic scene because it's got pathos, it's got incredible drama, it's got some good bits of action. You know, all the weapons they're firing are real weapons, and you know, the Thompson is firing in the right way, the carbine is firing in the right way, the machine gun is firing in the right way. So you know they're real weapons with real blanks in, and the whole thing is just a really, really good part of the film, and it's interesting because just before that, it's just dragging a bit. So it's a welcome kind of injection of high drama and action at the same time.
Yeah,
I also thought the denouement was brilliant as well.
The pacing is something that is sort of, it could be a little bit quicker, but I guess it's trying to show how far these guys have had to travel to get there.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, on a second viewing, I appreciated it more. On the first viewing, I was like, come on, let's get to the next scene, please. You know, let's get to the next set piece. But
it's just a bit too ponderous at times, isn't it? And it's just it lingers a bit too long while they're, you know, I mean, you know, in the plane before they jump out, for example, you know, that's about 5 minutes. It just doesn't need to be that long. Yeah. And I reckon that the whole film would be much better if it was just tightened up and shaved off.
Yeah, I always think that though. But when we talk about these movies from, you know, gosh, 67, 80 years ago now, is it something like that?
Yeah.
The way we consume cinema is different now, obviously. So back then, that's your whole week is going to the pictures. You get your news, you get your cartoon.
Yes.
Then you're sitting down, you're in for the long haul, and you're not going to know. You know, you look at movies back then; they're all about 2 hours long usually. You know, they're never usually like shorter than that. So it's.
But this is 2 hours 20, isn't it? This is, and I read a contemporary review of when it came out, and it got a really, really high, it got very good rating, but it did say it was half an hour too long.
Wow, that's rare for the time. Yeah,
I think it's interesting because there's a lot of procedural elements, like as you mentioned there, James, in the Dakota. Literally, he goes through like how you put your shoot line on the.
Well, I thought all that was absolutely fascinating. Yeah, really, I mean, if you want to know what it was like about flying over Normandy, that's how they do it.
Yeah. But it's interesting that they decided to be so procedural, like with the reconnaissance photos being developed. So it's almost showing the audience how things are done, and at that point, Williams is sort of the audience member, and he's having it all explained to him. And he's like, oh, okay, right. So
yeah, he's the foil, isn't he?
Yeah, he's
the conduit.
He's us, isn't he? He's meant to be us, out of his depth. You know, we're meant to be him. So Matt, your favourite bit before we move on to the alley tally?
Well, we mentioned it earlier. I really like a couple. I mean, I love the whole film, to be fair, but the end scene is a great one with the guys on the hill. But I really like the radar station attack. I like the scope and the scale of that. I think it's really interesting that they decided to make the focal point of that initial part of the movie, the radar station, because, James, I don't know how many radar stations Japan had in Burma, but I don't think it was that many, if I recall rightly.
I have no idea, actually. I don't know. I've been probably none at all.
So it's a really interesting thing that they chose to have, an attack on a radar station.
I know the War Department, Matt, said that in those memos, there's one they go, well, the Japanese don't really have many radar stations as it is, so be careful what you sort of put on screen. But
really, I suppose it makes it, it's all the more vital that they attack this radar station because there aren't many of them.
No, exactly, yeah.
But they've gone to a lot of trouble to get that set up. So there's the various shacks where they're going to the canteen. And they have
it's like a little sort of compound, isn't it? Yeah,
it is. Yeah, and they have the racks with rifles stacked up, and the radar antenna is literally rotating. There's a guy sat on it, and it's a nice little bit of scale to a film that's otherwise quite close, except in the stock footage. It's following just a platoon of men. So it's quite an intimate film at times, and you get to know the intricacies of a lot of the characters, because I suppose that's one of the benefits of the almost 2.5 hour runtime, is you get to see bits of these characters. Some of them are wisecracking, some of them are a little bit combat stressed, let's say. So it gives a bit of nuance. But that scene's really great because it's kind of shows them setting up for the attack. It's all well executed. Everything goes great. Try and get back to the plane. That's when
of course it does. You're attacking a main position with one of the main cast members. I think you're going to be fine, aren't you, in any movie? And especially if you're attacking.
But isn't Errol Flynn just terrific?
Of course.
I mean, he's such a great film star.
Yeah.
And he's had such an incredibly interesting life. I mean, it's a tragic life, and of course, it doesn't end there, because he had this incredibly good-looking son called Sean.
Yes.
He was then killed in Cambodia.
Yeah,
he became a war photographer.
He's friends with Tim Page, wasn't he? And
that's right.
They went around, and he was apparently the Khmer Rouge got him apparently. But
they did. Yeah,
still not found a body. But there's a great series called Frankie's House, which has Ian Glenn playing Tim Page, and Sean Flynn as a character in that too. And it's about their friendship and when Sean goes missing and how it affects Tim Page. I think we'll probably do that on the show eventually.
Wow.
So I think that probably brings us on to the alley tally.
What's your favourite part, Rob? You haven't told us.
I mentioned it. It's the bit with the stock footage. I just love it. I think it's fantastic.
The Dakota and the chaps pushed out.
Really think it's great.
Good.
It's just, I just like, it's more from a cinema point of view that I like that. I know it's not a pivotal scene or anything in particular, but it just how it looks and how it's done. I think for the time,
it adds a lot, doesn't it?
It's just impressive.
There's a huge amount of attention to detail, which I think is really impressive. Very unlikely in an American wartime film or film from that period. And I know I mentioned the griming up of the jump jackets and all the rest of it, but it's really good.
So before we get into that, James, I think we'll run the alley tally jingle and we'll get into the kit.
It's time for Alley Tally on Fighting on Film.
So as James was alluding to there before we played the lovely jingle by Chaz Mina, and thanks very much for that, Chaz. I mean, the kit in this movie is just spot on, isn't it?
It's absolutely spot on, and it's incredibly rare that it is. And it's not just that it's spot on, it's also that it's sort of bashed about, and they get, they start off with clean kit when they're getting on the plane to go to the start of the mission. It's all absolutely pristine. By the end of it, it's absolutely threadbare, and you can see the grime on it. They've obviously been wearing these things while they've been filming it.
Yeah, there's all rips on the arms.
Filmed it sequentially, rips on the arms, but also it's really grimy and dirty.
Yeah,
and the stubble's grown on the face. They're really sweaty. Errol Flynn's his netting over his helmet has sort of got torn.
Yeah,
it's really good.
Yeah,
and there's little things like it says, "Okay, boys, can you go make a stretcher and get him on the stretcher?" And you see them chopping down 2 bamboo things. They take off their jackets. They thread the jackets through the two shoots of the bamboo sticks.
Yeah.
Put the guy on the stretcher. There's your makeshift stretcher. You go, yeah, of course that's how they did it.
It's really good, isn't it?
But it just really rings true. It's really good.
And it's got to be the possibly one of the earliest on-screen debuts of the American paratrooper jump jackets and jump uniforms. Because I don't think I've seen it beforehand, and I know that usually it's only in stock footage. In movies, I don't know if I've seen it before. But as you say with the kit, it's great because most of the chaps that are carrying Thompsons have rigger pouches, those big sort of ones there, and some have like Thompson pouches, things like that. And the guys that have Garans actually have Garand rifle belts, and that's really rare. You don't usually, after like 50s movie cinema, 60s, 70s, guys have SMGs, but they're carrying like rifle pouches. It's just it's that added attention to detail that holds up still. I know now we're used to these ultra sort of realistic war movies, 1917, there's not one pouch out of place, but before recent times, you're in Band of Brothers, you see that realism, but this movie really takes the time. And it's nice
The
to
only thing that's missing is Errol Flynn doesn't have a pistol. You'd expect him to have a 45.
Especially with paratroops. Yeah, they really loved them, didn't they?
But he's carrying
But he doesn't seem to have one at all.
No, I don't think he
He's got a
does. I
carbine.
think anyone has a secondary weapon. But he's carrying an M1.
They've obviously got the machetes, which
yeah, that's really nice touch. Yeah, even down to Williams having a machete on him too, which is really.
Did
nice.
you notice some of the M1918 fighting knives they had? You know, with the knuckle duster.
Yeah.
So it's sort of like on the machete.
That's
scabbard.
it. Yeah. That's
and there's
really
a couple
nice.
of them pull it out for the some of the quieter.
The only
attacks.
thing that annoyed me, and I think I can explain why, but I thought about it last night and it irked me a little bit. They don't have any musette bags. They don't have any haversacks on them, and I only put that down to they're only meant to be there for that initial blowing up of the radar station. But surely, if you're going into the jungle and there's a slim chance that you might get, you might not be able to be picked up. Surely you'd go in with a little bit more.
Well, they don't expect to be there. And in that briefing scene, I made a note last night. Flynn, again, that procedural element, Flynn actually tells the guys what they're going to take with them. And he says, don't bring any toiletries, don't bring any haversacks, etc.
Yeah, that's true.
He says, you'll carry your standard SOP load of ammo, six grenades, exactly. Can take 230 caliber machine guns, 1,000 rounds each. And that's it.
Yeah.
So they even go to the attention to detail of going, why they're so likely
dependent on supply jobs, aren't they? And the jobs that come in.
So Matt, I know you were doing some digging. What is that 30 caliber mock-up that they've got? What the hell's going on there? It's a Vickers gun.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So it's really interesting because I watched it and I thought, this is cool. We got, we're going to get some 30 caliber action. So it's not a Browning, and it's actually a mocked up Vickers gun. There are Browning M1919 A4s in the movie, but they never fire. Because you see that characteristic squat tripod, and the Browning is a much thinner weapon because
I think the
Vickers
one that
has
Flynn's
a fusee
holding,
spring on the side that you can see.
I think it might have been hollowed out for Flynn to carry because there's a bit where he's carrying it upside down and you can see inside the receiver and it just looks like there's nothing in there. So I wonder if the Warner Brothers prop department have been cutting bits out of it.
I mean, it could be a legitimate Browning and they've just taken the bolt out. That would significantly lighten it.
You wouldn't want your leads start hurting themselves, would you?
Exactly. It's a Vickers, and I can only imagine it's because what the studio had for blank firing.
Yeah.
You can tell it's a Vickers because of the fusee spring on the side and the direction of feed, but also there's a couple of scenes where it's characteristically on a very tall Vickers gun tripod rather than the.
Yeah, it is, and they do their best to hide it though. It's always some like foliage or something. But
there's some lovely little bits focusing on the machine gun firing. Again, the cinematography by James Wong Howe is really nice.
Very good.
But you can also tell that it's a Vickers because you can see the rear of where the barrel jacket would be.
That's how I sort of
in front of the receiver. So it looks a little bit off.
Away. Yeah,
it's really cool though.
It's nice to see it, and it's also nice to see 30 round Thompson mags because you don't really see those very often. It's a nice little feature.
Yeah.
Although the cuts compensators on the Thompsons look a bit funny. They look a bit mocked up to me.
Some of them look a bit mocked up. Yeah, I know what you mean.
They could be blank adapters, maybe for blank.
Oh, I don't know. Maybe.
I don't know.
But yeah, there's some 20 round magazines in there as well. When I watched it again last night, I noticed a few 20 rounds. But as you say, they all have those pouches for the 30 round.
Yeah, the rigger pouches. Yeah, it's really nice to see. And I think they try and make one of the Gurkha guides, I think they try and make it look like he's got 37 webbing on by making him wear his pouches incredibly high up his.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I noticed. Well, there's some scenes where like Errol's sort of webbing is like right up near his, like where his nipples would be. It's like really weird. Like he sort of wears it a bit off in certain sequences. But it looks great, and I have to mention, it's really nice to see all those Waco gliders at the end. I mean, if you're a glider fan, it's incredible. And
they might not be strictly accurate.
No, but especially that end sequence where the Dakota.
Oh, the gliders was fantastic.
So good, yeah, and especially when you see the Dakota pick it up at the end. I mean, that looks great.
I don't think that's ever been seen in any other film.
I don't think I've seen it. I don't think I've only seen it in stock footage. I haven't seen it replicated on film, and that definitely is shot.
No, it's fantastic.
That's definitely shot for the movie. I mean, and that's another thing again where that budget's coming in. You wouldn't be able to do that if you didn't have the budget to pick it up. And I know that Jack Jack L. Warner himself was one of the executive producers. So no expense is spared in the movie, and you can really see it. And obviously that really helps with the kit and stuff like that, because you can just see the money on screen. It's just brilliant.
I was gonna interject and say that I think one of my favorite picks for the alley tally would be Williams's cravat and combat jacket combo.
Yeah, really nice.
In the briefing, he's very, very suave. Liked it.
And he has his proper.
Oh yeah, he's got an M41. Hasn't
That's
he?
it. Yeah,
He's got Parsons jacket to start off with.
And that's where the Hemingway thing came in for me, because there's pictures of Hemingway running around Normandy with a cravat on. In his Willis Jeep. So that's where I got the thing from. And then with the age and him being thin, and him smoking.
I can see it. Yeah,
I got
definitely.
Pyle from that. And I thought, because Pyle and Hemingway were probably the two of the most well-known war correspondents publicly at the time. Hemingway being a novelist and Pyle just for his incredible works. But it's even down to, and they didn't need to do it, but it was really nice to see. As listeners will know, or people who follow me on Twitter, I love a bit of war correspondent. It's action. It's just fantastic to see it. He's got his armband with the C on it, and it's not a proper one, but there were people made their own and things like that. They were sort of ad hoc made. Like I know the British got their own really nicely made war correspondence badge, but the American correspondents had an absolute mad mashup of badges. But it's just really nice to see his armband with the C on it, because they didn't need to do it, but it's just that extra level of detail. Someone at Warner Brothers had to read the Shafe manual to see what war correspondents had to be wearing. It's just really nice to see it, especially to see as well. I know Yesterday's Enemy has war correspondents represented, but it is also nice to see war correspondents represented in a movie about the Far East. It's
nice to get a film about China, Burma, India, to be honest.
Yeah, really.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's only a handful.
And actually,
really.
although it's filmed in California, it's for the most part it's pretty convincing. And the fact that they do blend it with the theatre footage as well of the kind of landscape, it works. I mean, it's not unconvincing, is it?
No, and it holds up now. And I think it's recently had in the last year or few years, it had a 4K restoration. Or a definite 1080p restoration was on Blu-ray.
It does look great. I've watched a fairly high res version of it, and it looks fantastic still.
You'll have to go and watch Dawn Patrol now.
Yeah, I've seen bits of it. I've never seen it the whole way through. It's one of those movies.
Good.
It's Flynn and Niven. How can you not like that?
I know.
And Basil Rathbone.
I'm working through Niven's works. I'm sort of going backwards, I think. I usually start off with the stuff at the end of the career. I don't know why. I always like to see how they end up, usually where they start. So that was the alley tally for this week, and I think we did favourite scenes. We talked about the plot, so I think we should possibly go into final thoughts.
It's all about Flynn, isn't it? Really?
Oh, it has to be.
Yeah, I loved it. I thought it was great. I thought it was, apart from the criticism of being just a little bit too long, I thought it was fantastic. But really, really holds up as a war movie. For one that's made in, presumably filmed in 1944, comes out in 1945. It's terrific. It's really, really, really good.
Yeah, and I don't think that it's as well remembered as it possibly should be.
Yeah, no, I agree with
that. I don't think Flynn is as well remembered as he probably should be, really.
No, possibly.
When you think about it,
Flynn is terrific in it. He's really good. He is the main man, and he's got to be good in it, or else the film's going to fall to pieces.
Yeah,
and he is. He's absolutely top notch.
He has a lot to do in it. He's carrying a lot of the weight, the emotional weight, anyway, through a lot of the sequences, and he really pushes through. And I wished he'd had more of those straight roles, because he didn't get them very often. But when he did get them, he really could act very well and was a very good actor.
As I've said it before, Dawn Patrol, he's brilliant in that. He really is absolutely brilliant. I thought it was great.
Exactly. And I think possibly the controversy sullies the film's reputation a tiny bit, possibly.
Yeah, perhaps so. But I think it's unjustified, as we said.
It's unjustified.
I just don't think it's actual thing. I think, as James said, it's probably just a little bit of British perhaps
I think it's oversensitive at the end of the war.
It is.
You have to think about when all that criticism was coming out. I think that's the key point. But I thought it was great. Thank you for suggesting it.
No, it's fine. It's fine. I knew from listening to the We Have Ways for a while that you were a big Errol Flynn fan. So I thought if there was one movie to dangle in front of James Holland to bring him over to Fighting on Film, it would have been an Errol Flynn film. But we were...
And it worked. I fell for a hook, line and sinker.
Fantastic. So Matt, anything you'd like to add before we wrap up?
Yeah. It's really interesting that it's a film set in Burma. The controversy around it is interesting, but for me, it's one of Flynn's best films. I love the nuance he brings, and I love that it's a role that sort of frames that classic action man almost sort of role.
Yeah.
There's the bit on the hill where he's blasting away with his M1A1 carbine, and it gives that sort of like very tight close up of his face. He's grimacing as he's firing, and the Japanese waves coming in. It's just a great climax to the movie.
Yeah.
But yes, I'm so glad we did it, because there's a few Flynn films I'd love to cover on the pod, and I'm sure we will eventually.
Of course.
But yeah, it's a great one.
It's a brilliant film. It's brilliant. It's a great one, and we were
very good.
Yeah, and we were really pleased, thankful for James for coming on. Just amazing to talk to the great man.
And if you stop it,
and if you haven't read his book Burma 44 or anything by James Holland, please seek him out. You will not be disappointed. So.
Indeed.
Wrapping up again, don't forget to drop the pod a like, a share, a subscribe, write us a review on whatever podcast app you're listening on. Check us out on fightingonfilm.com. We also have a Facebook page, Fighting on Film. You'll find us there. And on Twitter at Fighting on Film. And we will catch you again in the next one. So thanks to James again.
Well, thank you for having me on, and thank you for suggesting it. It was a treat.
Our pleasure.
Thanks so much, James.
Bye-bye, everybody.
All the best.
Bye.
Cheerio.